When my daughter-in-law asked me to step aside, I smiled instead of crying. She stood there in the doorway, holding her phone, her voice calm and polite. She did not shout. She did not insult me. She only said, "Ma, it will be easier this way." I nodded. I even smiled. But inside my chest, something became very quiet. I had learned long ago that silence keeps peace, that a mother should not argue, that love means adjusting again and again. So I stayed silent. That day, I moved my chair a little farther from the family table. I folded my shawl and placed it neatly on the side. I told myself it was nothing, but deep inside, I felt something heavy. This was not the first time I was pushed aside. It had been happening slowly, so slowly that I almost did not notice. First, my opinions were not needed. Then, my presence was not required. And now, even my space was too much. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask my son if he saw what was happening, but the words stayed in my throat. I looked at their faces. They looked busy. They looked comfortable. And I did not want to disturb that comfort. So I stayed silent. That night, when the house went quiet, I sat alone and listened to the sounds I once belonged to. The television murmuring in the other room, soft laughter, soft footsteps passing by my door but never stopping. I pressed my lips together and told myself, "This is what love looks like now," but my heart did not believe it. I wondered when I stopped being a mother and became someone who must ask for space. I wondered when my home stopped feeling like my own. Most of all, I wondered why staying silent felt safer than speaking the truth. This is not a story of loud fights. There were no angry words, no broken plates. It is a story of quiet decisions, of polite smiles, of a mother slowly disappearing while still living in the same house. This is the story of how I stayed silent when my daughter-in-law pushed me aside. Before she came into my life, before the quiet distance, before I learned how to disappear, there was a life I built with my own hands. I was not a strong woman in the way people talk about strength. I did not raise my voice. I did not fight the world. My strength lived in small things, in waking up early, in cooking warm food, in keeping the house clean and calm. I married young. My husband was a simple man. He believed in routine and responsibility. He believed a home should feel safe. When our son was born, the house filled with sound, small cries, soft laughter, tiny footsteps that later became loud running. I gave everything to that child, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I remember sitting by his bed at night, watching his chest rise and fall, praying quietly that life would be kind to him. My husband worked long hours. Some days he came home tired, some days silent. But every evening we ate together, 3 plates on the table, 3 lives connected by food and routine. When my husband fell sick, the house changed. Hospitals replaced laughter. Medicines replaced meals. And then, one quiet morning, he was gone. After that, the house felt too big, too empty. I thought I would not survive that silence, but my son stayed close. "Ma, don't worry," he said. "I am here." Those words became my support. I held on to them like a promise. Years passed. My hair turned gray. My steps slowed. But I felt useful, needed. This house was still my place. This family was still my world. I did not know then that a place can slowly stop being yours without anyone asking you to leave.
When my son told me he wanted to get married, my heart felt 2 different things at the same time. One was happiness. The other was fear. I was happy because he had found someone to walk with him through life, someone to share his days and nights. But I was afraid too, afraid of change, afraid of losing my place in his life. I did not tell anyone about this fear. I kept it inside. A mother should be strong, I told myself. When she first came to our house, I woke up earlier than usual. I cleaned every corner. I cooked food with extra care. I wanted her to feel welcome. When she stepped inside, she touched my feet and smiled. "Ma," she said softly. That single word made my eyes warm. I took her into my arms. I told myself, she is my daughter now. In those early days, I watched her closely, not to judge her, but to understand her. She was confident. She spoke clearly. She knew what she wanted. She moved around the house with ease, as if she had always belonged there. I admired that. I told myself, she will bring new life into this home. I tried my best to make her comfortable. I showed her where things were kept. I explained small habits of the house. I shared stories about my son's childhood. She listened politely. She smiled often. Sometimes she laughed at stories that were not very funny. I thought that was kindness. In the kitchen, I let her take charge. When she cooked, I praised her food. Even when it tasted different from what I was used to, I smiled and said, "It is very nice." I believed encouragement builds bonds. At night, when everyone slept, I prayed quietly. I prayed that this marriage would bring peace. I prayed that our home would stay warm. I prayed that I would not become a problem. I had seen other families change after marriage. I had heard stories. Mothers pushed aside, homes divided. I promised myself I would not let that happen. I decided to be careful with my words, careful with my opinions, careful with my presence. If she woke up late, I did not comment. If she changed routines, I adjusted. If she wanted privacy, I stepped back. I believed love means giving space. My son seemed happy. That was what mattered most to me. He smiled more. He spoke about plans. He talked about the future. I listened and nodded. Sometimes I noticed he spoke less to me, but I told myself that was natural. A man builds a new life. A mother must not pull him back. I reminded myself of this again and again. In the beginning, she called me often. "Ma, what do you think? Ma, can you help me?" Those words made me feel needed. I helped whenever I could. I answered gently. I never said no. Slowly, those questions became fewer. She started making decisions on her own. I respected that. I told myself, she is learning. Let her grow. When guests came, she handled everything. I sat quietly and observed. People praised her confidence. They said, "She manages everything so well." I smiled and agreed. Inside, a small part of me felt invisible, but I pushed that feeling away. I did not want to be jealous. I did not want to be weak. I wanted to be a good mother-in-law. There were moments, small ones, that I noticed but did not speak about. Sometimes she corrected me in front of others. Her tone was polite but firm. Sometimes she made plans without telling me. I found out later. Sometimes she spoke to my son in a low voice, and when I entered the room, the conversation stopped. I noticed, but I stayed silent. I told myself, they are husband and wife now. This is normal. At night, I lay awake and listened to the house. The sounds were different now. More phone calls, more closed doors, more private laughter. I felt like a guest in my own home. But I did not want to admit that feeling. Instead, I worked harder to stay invisible. I cleaned quietly. I spoke softly. I avoided giving advice. I believed if I caused no trouble, there would be no distance. I was wrong. One evening she said to me, "Ma, you don't need to worry about this." Her words were kind, but they also closed a door. I nodded and stepped back. That night I sat alone and thought. I realized something important, but I did not fully understand it yet. I realized that love alone does not always protect your place. I realized that silence can slowly erase you. But still, I chose not to speak, because I was afraid that speaking might cost me everything. And so, without meaning to, I began to disappear.
Change does not arrive with noise. It does not knock loudly on the door. It comes quietly, like a soft wind that moves things slowly until one day you realize nothing is where it used to be. At first, the changes were very small, so small that I told myself I was imagining them. The kitchen was the first place that felt different. She moved the spice boxes one morning. She said it helped her cook faster. I nodded and smiled. Then she changed where the plates were kept, then the cups, then the jars I had used for years. Each time I told myself, this is her kitchen now too. I reminded myself that this house no longer belonged only to me. Meal times changed. Breakfast became later. Lunch became quicker. Dinner was sometimes skipped. I adjusted my body to new hours. I adjusted my hunger. I adjusted my expectations. When I asked gently, "Should we eat now?" she replied politely, "Later, Ma." That word, later, started appearing more often. Later for food, later for conversations, later for togetherness. Slowly, I stopped asking. When guests came, she took full control. She decided the menu. She decided the seating. She decided when things would end. People praised her confidence. She's very capable, they said. She runs the house so well. I smiled and agreed. I felt proud of her, but I also felt something else. I felt unnecessary. Earlier, people asked me questions. They waited for my opinion. They looked at me for answers. Now they looked at her. I told myself this was the natural order of life. The younger generation steps forward, the elder steps back. I accepted that. But what hurt was not stepping back.
What hurt was being quietly moved aside without being asked. My son changed too. Not suddenly, not harshly, just slowly. Earlier, he used to sit with me in the evenings. We talked about small things, news, neighbors, memories. Now he sat with her. He listened to her phone calls. He laughed at her jokes. When I spoke, he listened politely, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Sometimes he said, "Ma, let it be." Let it be. That sentence became common. If I asked a question, "Ma, let it be." If I suggested something, "Ma, let it be." I stopped offering suggestions. I stopped sharing opinions. I began to speak only when spoken to. I began to walk carefully, as if I might disturb something delicate. Sometimes I noticed conversations stopping when I entered the room. The room would fall silent for a moment, then someone would change the topic. I noticed, but I stayed quiet. I told myself, they want privacy. That is normal. At night, I lay awake listening. The house had new sounds now, soft phone voices, low laughter behind closed doors, doors locking gently. Earlier, all doors stayed open. I missed that openness, but I did not complain. I did not want to be seen as difficult. I did not want to be called old-fashioned. I did not want to become a problem. So I chose silence again and again. I told myself, if I stay quiet, things will stay peaceful. What I did not realize was this: peace built on silence slowly removes your place. And I was losing mine, one quiet moment at a time.
People often ask why women like me stay quiet, why we do not speak up, why we do not protest, why we accept being pushed aside. The answer is not weakness. The answer is fear. I was afraid of many things. I was afraid of hurting my son. He was all I had left, my only child, my only connection to the future. I was afraid that if I spoke too much, he would feel torn between us. I did not want him to choose. I was afraid of being called selfish. People often say, mothers should let go. I believed that deeply. I was afraid of becoming unwanted. I had seen elderly women sent away to other houses, ignored, forgotten. I did not want that life. So I told myself, if I ask for nothing, I will be allowed to stay. I believed a good mother-in-law should bend like water, flow around obstacles, never stand in the way. I believed silence was kindness. I believed patience was love. No one taught me that silence can also become self-erasure. Every time I swallowed my words, I felt a small pain. But I ignored it. I told myself pain was temporary, family was permanent. When I wanted to say, I feel left out, I stayed quiet. When I wanted to say, I still matter, I smiled instead. I convinced myself that my feelings were not important, that my role was complete, that I had already lived my life. I told myself, this is their time now. I forgot something very important. I forgot that love should not require disappearance. I forgot that being patient does not mean becoming invisible. But at that time, I did not have these words. I only had fear, and fear kept my mouth closed. The day she asked me to move rooms did not feel dramatic. There was no argument, no raised voice, no anger. That is why it hurt so deeply. She came to me one afternoon. Her tone was calm, her face polite. "Ma," she said, "we are thinking of making some changes." I looked at her and nodded. She continued, "It would be better if you used the back room." The back room. A small room, less light, less air. A room that held old boxes and forgotten things. For a moment, I could not speak. I felt something sink inside my chest, but my face stayed calm. I smiled and said, "Okay, dear." That was all. She thanked me and walked away. She did not know what that moment took from me. I went into my room and sat quietly. I looked around. This room held my life. The bed where I rested after long days, the cupboard with my clothes, the window I opened every morning. I packed slowly, not because I was careful, but because my hands felt heavy. I folded my clothes neatly. I wrapped small memories gently. No one came to help. No one asked if I was okay. When night came, I carried my bag to the back room. The room smelled unfamiliar. I placed my things quietly. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. That night, I did not cry loudly. I cried silently. Tears soaked my pillow without making a sound. I realized something painful. I had not been pushed out suddenly. I had been pushed out gently, slowly, with my own permission. Because every time I stayed silent, I made it easier. That was the night I understood what I had lost. Not a room, but my place. After I moved into the back room, life continued as if nothing had changed. The sun still rose in the morning, the kettle still boiled, the house still breathed. Only I felt different. I began walking more softly, as if my footsteps might disturb someone, as if my presence needed permission. I woke up early, earlier than everyone else. I finished my work before the house became busy. I cleaned quietly. I folded clothes slowly. I did not want to be noticed. During the day, I stayed in my room more often. The back room became my small world. Less light came through the window, but I told myself light was not important. What mattered, I thought, was peace. At mealtimes, sometimes they called me. Sometimes they forgot. When they forgot, I ate later. I told myself hunger passes. Conversations happened without me. Plans were made without my knowledge. I learned things after they had already happened. At first, this surprised me. Then it became normal. My son still spoke to me, but his words were fewer. He asked if I had eaten, if I needed medicine. He did not ask how I felt. Maybe he thought feelings were unnecessary. One day I fell ill. Not seriously, just weakness, body pain. She brought me medicine. She placed it on the table. Her voice was polite. "Ma, take this." Then she left. No one sat beside me. No one asked if the pain was less. That was the moment I understood something very clearly. I was not unwanted. I was simply not needed. Indifference feels heavier than anger. Anger at least sees you. Indifference passes through you. I lay in my bed and stared at the wall. I felt like an old piece of furniture, still there, but no longer important. And yet, I stayed silent. One night, sleep did not come. The house was quiet. Everyone else was resting. I lay awake in the dark back room, listening to my own breath. Tears came slowly, not from anger, not from shock, but from understanding. I asked myself a question I had avoided for a long time. When did I stop mattering? The answer did not come quickly. I thought about my life. I thought about every time I stayed quiet, every time I smiled instead of speaking, every time I said, "It's okay," when it was not. I realized something painful. I had taught them how to treat me. By staying silent, I showed them my needs were small. By adjusting always, I showed them my comfort did not matter. By never saying no, I showed them I had no limits. This was not their cruelty alone. This was my habit. I cried for myself that night. Not for the room, not for the respect, but for the woman who believed disappearing was love. I understood then that silence had protected the family, but it had broken me. That night, something inside me shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently. After that night, I did not change the world. I did not confront anyone. I did not argue. But I changed something inside. I stopped waiting to be noticed. I stopped hoping someone would understand without me speaking. I began doing small things for myself. I sat in the sunlight when it came through the window. I read slowly. I rested when I was tired. I spoke when I needed something. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. Sometimes my words surprised them, but I did not apologize. I let go of expectations. I stopped wanting my old place back. I accepted that roles change, but I did not accept being erased. I learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and love does not mean surrendering dignity. I forgave my daughter-in-law, not because she asked, but because carrying bitterness was heavier than carrying silence. I forgave my son, too, because he was learning, because he was human. But I also forgave myself for staying silent for so long. Today, I still live quietly, but my silence is no longer fear. It is choice. I understand now that love should make space for you, not push you out of it. If you are listening to my story and you feel invisible, please remember this. Adjust when love is real. Be patient when it is mutual. But never disappear to keep peace, because peace that costs your self-worth is too expensive. I stayed silent for a long time, but now I listen to myself, and that has made the difference.